Students, welcome to lecture 19. In this lecture, I will discuss the health effects of lipids. This is the first of two lectures in which I will be discussing the health effects of lipids because we have different types of lipids. We have monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated, we have trans fatty acids, and so on. Okay, and so we will begin with this lecture and continue with the next one. In this first lecture on health effects of lipids, we will be looking at specific fatty acids, trans fatty acids, saturated fats, monounsaturated fatty acids, as well as polyunsaturated fatty acids. Specifically, we'll be looking at the predominant sources of these fatty acids and what health effects they exhibit. Let's begin with trans fatty acids. Let me first list the predominant sources of trans fatty acids. As you can see, one of the predominant sources is junk food / candy / processed foods. This includes stuff like pies and cookies and things of that nature, okay? And interestingly, these foods may not be naturally rich in trans fatty acids, but to these foods, manufacturers added commercially made or artificial trans fatty acids. And these commercially made or artificial trans fatty acids have worse health effects than trans fatty acids found in foods in which they are found naturally, such as meat, milk, and dairy. These quotes illustrate the health effects of trans fatty acids. On a per gram basis, the adverse effect of trans fatty acids appears to be stronger than that of saturated fatty acids. So, number one, I want you to remember that the effect of trans fatty acid is what? Is adverse or detrimental. And number two, trans fatty acids have worse effect than saturated fatty acids. This is why the World Health Organization recommended the following. Trans fatty acid intake should not exceed 1% of energy. Now, interestingly, in the United States, artificial trans fatty acids are no longer permitted to use. Okay? And so in the United States, before the trans fatty acids were banned, the intake was about 5.6% of energy, considerably higher than this recommendation. But again, they were banned, so they are no longer permitted to use. This may not be so in other countries. That's why I'm still discussing the health effects. In the same time as the intake of trans fatty acids in the United States was very high, the US National Academy of Sciences recommended the following. Trans fatty acid intake should be as low as possible. Of course, if we want to achieve it, we have to decrease intake of pies and cookies and candies and other junk food of that nature. Let's switch to saturated fatty acids. The predominant sources of saturated fatty acids include meat, milk, and dairy. However, interestingly, the profile of saturated fatty acids in these foods are a little bit different. So you may remember that fatty acid is a compound that includes chain of carbons to which hydrogens were attached, and at each end they have a metal group or acid group. Okay? Depending on how many carbons are in that chain, in that chemical structure, we may refer to them as short chain, medium chain, or long chain. Okay? Milk and dairy contain more of short and medium chain fatty acids, and therefore, in many studies, the health effects of saturated fatty acids from milk and dairy was shown to be actually beneficial or neutral. That was not so for meat. Meat intake and intake of specific saturated fatty acids from meat has been shown in many studies to increase risk of many conditions, of which I will be discussing in a moment. Here's an example of a study or publication that analyzed the impact of meat intake on mortality. Mortality means death. Okay, we have analysis on the left-hand side based on 10 studies, and it showed that intake of meat in general increases risk of premature mortality. On the right-hand side, we have analysis of 5 studies which show that increased intake of processed meat increases risk of mortality. What I would like you to remember, not only that meat intake increases risk, and this is attributed to saturated fat content, but also the following. Processed meat intake is associated with a higher risk of detrimental health conditions such as cardiovascular disease compared to red or other type of meat intake. Of course, other type means turkey, chicken, things of that nature. Red meat, that's beef, pork, things of that nature. And processed meat is stuff like sausages, burgers, okay? And we find the same with other health conditions, such as cancer, such as type 2 diabetes, okay? In all of these conditions, processed meat intake appears to be more detrimental than other type of meats. Okay, let's continue with monounsaturated fatty acids. First, let me list dietary sources. So we find monounsaturated fatty acids in meat, olive oil, and nuts. Okay, and the health effects largely depends on where they come from. So we find that studies showed us that monounsaturated fatty acids from meat actually may increase risk for the same health conditions as intake of monounsaturated fatty acids from olive oil and nuts. Interestingly, I want to elaborate on olive oil. Olive oil is very beneficial to our health. Studies showed us that intake of olive oil decreases the risk of many health conditions. I listed some of them here. As you can see, cardiovascular disease, many types of cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, and there are others that I did not mention. I can list, for example, osteoporosis, arthritis, things of that nature. Okay, and therefore, again, it is a good idea to invest in extra virgin olive oil because of the many benefits of using extra virgin olive oil. How do you find a good extra virgin olive oil? And notice I have already used this term 2 times, not just olive oil, but extra virgin olive oil. The word virgin indicates that this particular oil was derived in room temperature. It was not subjected to hot temperature when it was extracted from the olives. Okay, and that means that the beneficial compounds found in oil were preserved. So it doesn't just contain monounsaturated fatty acids. It contains other what we call minor compounds that are beneficial for our health. And the word extra means that the fatty acids are still preserved as triglycerides, which is actually also beneficial to our health. Well, there are many different types of olive oil available on the market. So for example, notice on this picture, we see one that says light taste. Another one says pomace. The other one says pure. And then here it says cooking olive oil. Interestingly, none of these is the extra virgin olive oil. And therefore, none of them should be purchased, okay? Again, what we are looking for is the extra virgin olive oil. And it should say on the bottle, extra virgin olive oil. So that's principle number 1. When we want to buy olive oil, we look for extra virgin olive oil. Secondly, notice this is a California olive extra virgin olive oil. And again, analysis of this particular oil have shown that it is a good oil. Notice here it says cold pressed. That's what we want to see as well. But in addition, we also have an extra certificate on some olive oil. So this particular one comes from California Olive Oil Council. Okay, so this is independent of the manufacture of this particular oil. Okay, we have another one from the North American Olive Oil Association. So that's principle number 2. In addition, principle number 1 was we are looking for extra virgin olive oil. Principle number 2 is we are looking for a certification. Does it contain a seal of a third-party certification? Okay. And then number 3, notice for this particular olive oil, we will find the following information on the food label, on the label. Product contains selected cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil from countries indicated below: Italy, Spain, Greece, Tunisia, Turkey, Morocco. Okay, so every time we see olive oil and that list many countries as the origin of the oil, we should be cautious about it. Okay, it is better to buy olive oil that has just one country of origin, and or also that uses a specific name of a region, like we could have from Italy, Andalusia, or rather, not that would not be Italy, that would be Turkey, for example, right? Or Sicily, right? You know, a region of Italy. That would be also a good sign that this is extra olive or virgin olive oil that we can trust to buy. Another source of monounsaturated fatty acids are nuts. And so I'm going to show you just findings from one study, health benefits of nut consumption. Okay, and you can see here frequency of nut consumption and risk of death from coronary heart disease. Okay, we can see that the more individuals ingested nuts, the lower was the risk of death from coronary heart disease. And one of the reasons for these benefits is the monounsaturated fatty acids found in nuts. Okay, here's another study, nut consumption and risk of heart disease. And again, as servings per week increase, so decreases the risk of heart disease. And so the recommendation today is to have a variety of nuts. Please remember, number 1, a variety of nuts. Number 2, ingest them every day, approximately 1.5 ounces or a handful. Okay, a handful of nuts every day and a variety of them. Let's briefly look at polyunsaturated fatty acids. And when it comes to sources, vegetable oil. So if you go to an American grocery store, you find corn oil and vegetable oil and soybean oil, sunflower seed oil, safflower seeds oil, and many others. Okay. And number 2, seeds. So we can have flax seeds and again, sunflower seeds and sesame seeds and things of that nature. Okay. And here's an illustration of the health effects. So here's a study in which individuals received either sunflower seeds or flax seeds. And in both cases, cholesterol level was reduced, both total cholesterol as well as LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol. And so we find that polyunsaturated fatty acids and sources of polyunsaturated fatty acids improve blood lipid profile and reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. Okay, that's it for the first part on health effects of lipids. If you have any questions, send them to me in an email. Thank you.